In every human connection, beneath the surface of affection, trust, and shared experiences, there exists an invisible layer, what can only be described as the shadow within relationships. This shadow is not inherently evil, but it is often uncomfortable, hidden, and powerful. It consists of everything we deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, and inevitably, we bring it into our interactions with others. While love and light draw people together, it is often the unspoken darkness within that shapes the true dynamics of their bond. From the very beginning, relationships are built not only on conscious attractions, but also on unconscious forces. People are drawn to others who reflect both their brightest potential and their hidden, unresolved aspects. A friend's kindness may soothe a neglected part of us. A partner's confidence might awaken ambitions we buried long ago, but just as easily, someone's flaws can mirror our deepest fears, insecurities, or wounds. This is where the shadow begins to weave its subtle threads. Every individual carries traits and emotions they consider unacceptable, weak, or dangerous. Instead of confronting these aspects, most people repress them. The shadow doesn't disappear, it gets projected. In relationships, this projection means we unconsciously assign our denied feelings or traits to others. For example, a person who refuses to acknowledge their own jealousy might become hyper alert to signs of envy in their partner. Someone who suppresses their anger might constantly accuse others of being hostile. These projections act like invisible filters, distorting how we perceive the other person. As relationships deepen, these projections intensify. What was once charming can suddenly become irritating. What felt safe begins to feel threatening. This shift often confuses people because consciously, nothing obvious has changed. Unconsciously, however, the relationship has triggered old wounds and brought hidden shadows to the surface. One partner may suddenly feel controlled, not because the other is controlling, but because the dynamic echoes a childhood memory of authority and powerlessness. Another may interpret a friend's success as betrayal, not because betrayal exists, but because it awakens feelings of inadequacy long buried within. The shadow within relationships thrives in silence. It grows strongest in the areas we refuse to examine. Whenever people avoid honest conversations, whenever they dismiss uncomfortable feelings as irrational, the shadow gains power. It becomes the uninvited third presence in every interaction. It influences tone, creates misunderstandings, and magnifies conflicts. Over time, small shadow-driven tensions can build into large rifts, leaving both sides bewildered by how something meaningful unraveled so quickly. What makes the shadow particularly potent is its ability to disguise itself. It doesn't appear as your shadow. It appears as your partner's flaw, your friend's betrayal, your colleague's arrogance. It externalizes, making it seem like the problem is always out there. This is why relationships often fall into cycles of blame and defense. And then each person sees the other as the cause of their discomfort, rarely recognizing that what they are reacting to might actually be their own unacknowledged emotions. In close relationships, where emotional intimacy is high, the shadow's impact is even more pronounced. Love opens the door for vulnerability, and vulnerability exposes what has long been hidden. This is why some of the deepest conflicts arise not with strangers, but with those we care about most. Partners may find themselves repeating patterns they swore they'd never revisit. Friends may suddenly experience envy, resentment, or mistrust they can't rationally explain. The shadow isn't malicious, it's simply relentless in seeking expression. It wants to be seen. When someone begins to grow, evolve, or change within a relationship, the shadow is stirred. Growth acts like a bright light, and the brighter it shines, the more the shadow becomes visible. Old dynamics that were previously manageable now feel strained. The relationship begins to mirror the parts of the self that are being challenged by this growth. One person's expansion might highlight the other's stagnation. One person's newfound boundaries might expose the other's dependency. It is in these moments that people often, suddenly, turn against each other, not realizing that the real struggle is between their conscious identity and their shadow. The shadow is not purely destructive. It also carries the keys to deeper understanding and authentic connection. Hidden within its darkness are parts of ourselves that, when integrated, make us more whole. In relationships, recognizing the shadow allows both individuals to move beyond projection and truly see each other as they are, not as distorted reflections of past wounds. This requires courage, because facing the shadow means confronting discomfort, shame, and vulnerability. It means admitting that not every problem is caused by the other person, and that some conflicts arise from within. Without this awareness, relationships remain trapped in unconscious patterns. People repeat the same arguments, attract similar partners, or experience cycles of closeness and distance without understanding why. The shadow ensures that unresolved emotional material will continue to surface until it is acknowledged. Even when a relationship ends, the shadow doesn't disappear. It simply waits to emerge in the next bond, wearing a different face, but carrying the same themes. The presence of the shadow explains why relationships can be simultaneously beautiful and painful. It is why love can feel both healing and threatening. It is why people who once felt like allies can suddenly become sources of tension and conflict. The shadow is always there, beneath the surface, influencing emotions, decisions, and perceptions, waiting for moments of vulnerability to make itself known. The mirror effect in human relationships is one of the most powerful, yet least understood psychological forces shaping how people perceive, react to, and treat each other. At its core, this effect suggests that the individuals we encounter act like mirrors, reflecting back to us the traits, emotions, and truths that exist within ourselves, both the admirable and the uncomfortable. While it may seem like others are simply showing us who they are, in many cases they are also showing us aspects of who we are, often aspects we have not yet fully recognized, accepted, or integrated. When two people meet, their conscious minds notice external attributes, appearance, behavior, speech, confidence, energy. But beneath these surface impressions, their unconscious minds are scanning for familiarity, resonance, and reflection. We are drawn to people who mirror something inside us. Sometimes our highest ideals, sometimes our deepest wounds. For example, someone who radiates confidence may attract those who secretly long to express their own hidden strength. Similarly, someone who displays emotional volatility may activate unresolved emotions in others, forcing them to confront their own instability or repressed anger. The mirror effect operates in both positive and negative directions. In its positive form, it inspires admiration, connection, and growth. When you see someone's courage, kindness, or talent, What you are actually experiencing is the recognition of a quality that exists within you as potential or reality. You resonate with their brilliance because it mirrors your own, even if it's still dormant. This explains why certain people inspire us without even trying. They are simply embodying something we recognize, often subconsciously, in ourselves. In its negative form, the mirror effect can trigger discomfort, envy, irritation, or even hostility. When another person's behavior highlights qualities we have disowned, ignored, or suppressed, the emotional response can be intense and confusing. For instance, witnessing someone's boldness might trigger resentment in a person who has been taught to stay silent. Observing someone's success might awaken buried feelings of inadequacy or wasted potential. Instead of recognizing this as self-reflection, many people externalize the emotion, projecting their discomfort onto the other person and blaming them for the way they feel. This is why sudden hostility often emerges in relationships when one person starts changing or growing. Personal growth acts like a polishing cloth on the mirror. It makes the reflection sharper and harder to ignore. As one individual evolves, their new behavior, mindset, or boundaries start reflecting truths the other person may not be ready to face. If one partner begins to develop self-worth and sets firm boundaries, for example, the other may be forced to confront their own dependency, insecurity, or controlling tendencies. If a friend starts succeeding in life, their progress may reflect back another's sense of stagnation or fear of being left behind. The mirror effect is most intense in emotionally significant relationships because emotional closeness magnifies reflection. The more someone matters to us, the more strongly they mirror us. Family members, close friends, and romantic partners act as highly polished mirrors, showing us not just our surface traits, but also our hidden patterns and deep-seated beliefs. This can lead to powerful growth if both individuals are willing to look honestly at the reflection, but it can also lead to conflict when denial, projection, or insecurity dominates. Projection is the defense mechanism most commonly associated with the mirror effect. Instead of recognizing that the uncomfortable emotion belongs to them, individuals attribute it to the other person. A classic example is when someone accuses another of being judgmental while refusing to admit their own critical tendencies. The mirror shows the truth, but the ego deflects it to protect itself from discomfort. This cycle keeps many relationships trapped in recurring conflicts that are less about actual incompatibility and more about unacknowledged self-reflection. The mirror effect can also explain why certain people provoke disproportionately strong reactions, both positive and negative, even when their behavior seems neutral. Sometimes the intensity of our reaction is less about what they did and more about what they reveal within us. A seemingly minor comment can sting if it reflects a deep-seated insecurity. A small act of kindness can move us profoundly if it mirrors a part of us we wish to express more. These reactions are clues pointing toward areas of our psyche that seek recognition, healing, or growth. Growth within relationships often requires the courage to confront these reflections without immediately projecting or deflecting them. This involves asking difficult but transformative questions. What exactly about this person's behavior is triggering me? Is it possible that they are reflecting something I haven't accepted about myself? Could my reaction be more about my inner world than about their actual actions? Such introspection can be uncomfortable, But it is precisely this discomfort that allows individuals to integrate their shadow aspects and grow emotionally. The mirror effect is not limited to negative traits or insecurities. It also reflects untapped potential and unclaimed power. Sometimes we envy or idolize people who are living in alignment with parts of ourselves we have neglected. A person might admire someone's creativity, not realizing that this admiration is a signal from their deeper self, urging them to awaken their own creative capacities. Similarly, intense attraction often arises because the other person embodies qualities the admirer wishes to bring forth in their own life. The mirror does not merely reveal what we hide, it also shows what we could become. Understanding the mirror effect transforms the way conflicts, judgments, and emotional reactions are perceived. Instead of seeing others as enemies or heroes, individuals begin to recognize them as mirrors reflecting their own evolving inner landscape. This awareness shifts the focus from control and blame towards self-awareness and responsibility. In doing so, relationships become not just emotional experiences, but profound tools for psychological insight and personal evolution. The mirror effect is constant, whether acknowledged or not. Every interaction holds up a mirror to some part of the self, whether it is a fleeting glance or a deeply revealing reflection. Some mirrors are gentle, others are confronting, but all of them offer opportunities for growth, integration, and deeper understanding of who we are beneath the layers of ego, defense, and unconscious habit. Every relationship, whether romantic, familial, or social, is built not only on spoken agreements and visible behaviors, but also on hidden expectations that operate beneath conscious awareness. These are known as unspoken psychological contracts, silent agreements people make with one another about how they should behave, what roles they should play, and how the relationship should function. Unlike formal contracts, these are never explicitly discussed or negotiated. They form gradually through experiences, emotional needs, cultural conditioning, and personal histories. Yet, despite their invisibility, they powerfully shape how individuals connect, support, and sometimes hurt each other. An unspoken psychological contract often begins forming in the earliest stages of a relationship, sometimes even in the first interactions. Each person observes the other's behavior, listens to their words, and subconsciously starts building assumptions about who this person is and how the relationship will unfold. These assumptions may seem harmless at first, but over time they solidify into expectations that neither party may even be aware of. For example, a friend who is always available to listen may unconsciously create an expectation that they will always prioritize others' problems over their own. A partner who often takes the lead in decision making may unintentionally set the standard that they will always carry that responsibility. Psychological contracts are shaped by individual histories. People bring their childhood experiences, cultural values, and emotional patterns into their relationships. Someone who grew up in a family where love was expressed through acts of service may assume that their partner will show care in the same way without ever articulating this belief. Another person who experienced abandonment might develop an unspoken expectation that their loved ones will constantly reassure them. Even if this need is never communicated, these internalized expectations become part of the silent framework that governs how people interpret each other's actions. The danger of unspoken psychological contracts lies in their invisibility. Because they are not openly discussed, Both parties may hold vastly different assumptions about what the relationship entails. One person may believe loyalty means daily communication, while the other interprets loyalty as long-term commitment regardless of daily contact. One may expect emotional availability at all times, while the other values personal space and independence. These mismatched expectations remain hidden until they are violated, at which point confusion, disappointment, or resentment can erupt seemingly out of nowhere. When someone breaks an unspoken contract, the emotional response is often disproportionate to the event itself. A delayed reply to a message, a forgotten gesture, or a change in behavior can feel like a betrayal, even if no promise was ever made. This is because the psychological contract was treated as real and binding by the unconscious mind. The other person may be completely unaware that they've crossed a boundary or violated an expectation, leading to misunderstandings that neither can easily explain. What looks like sudden hostility or distance is often the result of a broken silent agreement. These contracts also play a significant role in power dynamics within relationships. Some individuals unconsciously take on the role of caretaker, fixer, or peacekeeper, while others become accustomed to being supported, accommodated, or emotionally shielded. Over time, these patterns can create imbalances that feel natural but are built on unexamined expectations. If the caretaker begins to set boundaries or withdraw their constant support, the other person may feel betrayed, even though the original agreement was never spoken. The shift disrupts the psychological contract and forces both individuals to confront the unacknowledged structure of their bond. One of the most complex aspects of unspoken psychological contracts is that people often create them not out of manipulation, but out of need. Humans seek safety, predictability, and emotional fulfillment. By building these contracts unconsciously, individuals attempt to create a sense of stability and control in their relationships. They believe, often without realizing it, that if certain unspoken rules are followed, the relationship will remain safe and reliable. For example, a person might expect their partner to always validate their emotions because this mirrors how they define love. Another might expect unwavering loyalty because of a fear of abandonment. These contracts reflect deep psychological desires, but because they are hidden, they also carry the risk of silent disappointment. When one person evolves or changes within a relationship, these unspoken contracts often come under strain. Personal growth alters the roles people are willing to play. If someone who has always been emotionally available starts prioritizing self-care, their loved ones may experience this as a breach of the contract. They may perceive the change as selfishness or withdrawal, when in reality it is a natural shift in personal boundaries. Similarly, if one person's success changes their availability or energy, others who relied on the old dynamic may feel abandoned or overlooked. The psychological contract has been rewritten unilaterally, and the other party is left grappling with a new, unfamiliar reality. The most striking feature of these contracts is how rarely they are consciously examined. People assume that others understand their expectations intuitively, often because those expectations feel so obvious and natural to them. They forget that what feels self-evident from one perspective may be invisible from another. Two people may love each other deeply, yet clash repeatedly because their silent contracts are fundamentally different. Without awareness and communication, these unseen frameworks quietly dictate emotional reactions, behaviors, and relationship outcomes. In some cases, individuals hold multiple overlapping psychological contracts with different people, which can create inner conflict. Someone may have a contract with their family that obliges them to always be available, while simultaneously having an unspoken agreement with their partner to prioritize the relationship above all else. When these contracts collide, stress, guilt, and misunderstanding arise. The person feels pulled in different directions, trying to honor all the unspoken rules while ignoring the impossibility of doing so. Unspoken psychological contracts are also reinforced by societal norms and cultural narratives. Society often idealizes certain roles, such as the selfless parent, the loyal friend, or the endlessly supportive partner, creating collective expectations that individuals internalize. These cultural templates influence how people construct their personal contracts, often without questioning whether these expectations are fair, realistic, or healthy for all involved. By absorbing these narratives, people unknowingly impose them on their relationships, expecting others to conform to roles they themselves have accepted without scrutiny. The fear of irrelevance is one of the most silent yet powerful forces influencing human behavior and relationships. It operates deep within the psyche, often hidden beneath layers of pride, attachment, or defensiveness. At its core, this fear is about the terror of no longer mattering, of being outgrown, replaced, or forgotten. In relationships, communities, and even within families, this fear can shape how people respond to change, growth, and shifting dynamics. It doesn't always appear as fear. Sometimes it emerges as criticism, withdrawal, jealousy, or even hostility. But beneath these reactions lies the anxiety of losing significance in someone else's evolving story. Human beings have an intrinsic need to feel valued, seen, and important. From childhood, people form their sense of identity not only through self-perception, but also through how they are perceived by others. A parent's attention, a teacher's praise, a friend's loyalty. These interactions build the emotional scaffolding of relevance. To matter is to exist in someone else's emotional landscape in a meaningful way. As relationships deepen, this sense of importance can become intertwined with identity itself. When someone close begins to change, whether through personal growth, success, or shifting priorities, it can unconsciously trigger the fear of being left behind. This fear often begins subtly. A friend starts spending more time pursuing their goals, a partner becomes more independent, a colleague begins to shine in ways they previously didn't. On the surface, these changes might be positive, but to those who have become accustomed to a particular role in that person's life, they can feel destabilizing. If someone's sense of relevance depended on being needed, admired, or central to another person's decisions, then any change in that dynamic threatens their psychological footing. The mind begins to ask, often quietly at first, do I still matter? The fear of irrelevance is intensified by comparison. When people witness someone they know stepping into new stages of growth, their minds instinctively measure their own position relative to that person. If the gap between their current state and the other's growth seems wide, feelings of inadequacy or invisibility may arise. This comparison can create tension, even in loving relationships, because one person's evolution unintentionally spotlights the other's stagnation or unfulfilled desires. The person experiencing this fear may not consciously realize what's happening. Instead, They might become irritable, distant, or overly critical as a way of masking the discomfort of feeling less significant. In many relationships, roles are established over time. One person might be the mentor, the emotional anchor, the caregiver, or the reliable constant. These roles give a sense of identity and a purpose. However, when the other person grows in ways that reduce their reliance on that role, the one who held it may feel displaced. For example, a mentor might struggle when their protege surpasses them. A parent may feel irrelevant when their child no longer seeks their guidance. A friend who was once a confidant may feel pushed aside when new relationships emerge. These situations are not inherently hostile, but the shifting dynamics can awaken deep insecurities. The fear of irrelevance is not just emotional, it is also existential. To be irrelevant in someone's life is to confront the reality that relationships are fluid, that nothing stays fixed, and that people can grow apart, not because of malice, but because evolution changes priorities. This realization threatens the illusion of permanence that many people cling to in relationships. By believing that roles and bonds will always remain the same, individuals create a false sense of stability. When growth disrupts this illusion, fear emerges as a reaction to impermanence. Another dimension of this fear arises from the ego's attachment to control and identity. When someone has long defined themselves through their role in another person's life, losing that role can feel like losing a part of themselves. A partner who has always been the protector may struggle when their significant other becomes more independent. A friend who has always been the advisor may feel uneasy when their advice is no longer sought. The ego interprets these changes as rejection, even when they are simply natural progressions. This misinterpretation often leads to defensive behaviors that strain the relationship further. Social and cultural narratives also feed into the fear of irrelevance. Many societies equate worth with usefulness, status, or visibility. People are conditioned to believe that if they are not central to someone's life, or if they are not fulfilling a specific role, their value diminishes. These beliefs amplify insecurities when relationships evolve. A person might not only fear losing emotional significance, but also fear that their diminished role reflects poorly on their overall worth. The anxiety is not merely about being less important to one person. It becomes intertwined with broader fears of fading into insignificance in life itself. This fear can manifest in different behavioral patterns. Some individuals attempt to regain their relevance through increased control, inserting themselves into decisions or subtly undermining the other's independence. Others withdraw emotionally, creating distance as a way to protect themselves from the anticipated pain of being left behind. Some may resort to criticism or rivalry, trying to pull the other person back into the old dynamic to restore their sense of importance. These reactions are not always conscious strategies. Often they are instinctive attempts to cope with the discomfort of shifting relevance. The fear of irrelevance also plays out vividly in group dynamics and communities. As new leaders emerge, old ones may feel threatened. As social circles expand, certain members may fear losing their central position. These fears can lead to power struggles, silent competition, or passive-aggressive behavior, all stemming from the desire to maintain a sense of significance. In workplaces, families, and friendships alike, relevance often translates into influence, and losing that influence can feel like a personal diminishment. Personal growth, while beautiful, acts like a spotlight that illuminates these insecurities in others. When one person evolves, it forces those around them to confront their own fears of being left behind. This confrontation can bring out the best or worst in people, depending on how self-aware they are. Those who can examine their fear may adapt, redefine their role, and grow alongside the other person. Those who cannot may unconsciously resist change, clinging to outdated dynamics in an attempt to preserve their sense of importance. The fear of irrelevance, though often silent, influences countless human interactions. It shapes emotional responses, drives behaviors, and affects how people interpret changes in their relationships. It is a psychological undercurrent that, if left unexamined, can turn natural growth into a source of hidden tension, unspoken resentment, and subtle power struggles that alter the course of connections in profound ways. Power dynamics exist in every relationship, whether acknowledged or not. They shape how people interact, influence decisions, and determine whose needs are prioritized. While some dynamics are explicit, many operate beneath conscious awareness, woven into daily behaviors, emotional exchanges, and unspoken expectations. Over time, these dynamics can become stable patterns that both individuals grow accustomed to. However, a turning point often arises when one person's growth, self-awareness, or change behavior disrupts this equilibrium, leading to shifts that can alter the relationship entirely. This turning point is rarely smooth. It often triggers resistance, confusion, and emotional upheaval because it forces both individuals to confront their roles and the balance of power that has existed between them. Power dynamics often emerge early in relationships, sometimes in subtle ways. One person may naturally assume the role of decision maker, while the other becomes more accommodating. One may offer emotional support consistently, while the other leans on that stability. These roles are not inherently negative. They can create harmony and a sense of security. However, they also establish patterns of dependency and control that, over time, can become rigid. The individual with more power, whether emotional, financial, intellectual, or social, may come to expect their influence to remain unquestioned. The one with less power may adapt to their role so fully that they stop recognizing their own autonomy. The turning point occurs when the person in the lesser power role begins to awaken to their own agency. This awakening can happen gradually through personal growth, boundary setting, or life changes that alter their perspective. For example, someone who has always been emotionally dependent might begin to build inner strength through therapy, self-reflection, or new experiences. Someone who has always deferred decisions might gain confidence through career advancement or newfound clarity. As they start expressing their independence, the balance shifts. The other person, accustomed to their established role, may perceive this change not as healthy growth, but as a challenge to their authority. This shift often triggers defensive reactions. Those who have held more power may feel threatened, even if the change is reasonable. They may respond with subtle manipulation, guilt, tripping, or increased control to restore the previous dynamic. Sometimes this happens unconsciously. They are not necessarily trying to harm, but are reacting to the discomfort of losing influence. For instance, a partner who once made all the decisions may become critical when the other starts asserting opinions. A friend who was always the leader in the relationship may suddenly withdraw or display passive, aggressive behavior when their dominance is no longer unquestioned. The individual gaining power may also experience internal conflict. As they step into their autonomy, they might feel guilt, fear of rejection, or uncertainty about the consequences of disrupting the dynamic. These feelings can make the turning point emotionally complex. On one hand, there is empowerment and growth. On the other, there is the risk of destabilizing a relationship that may have provided security, even if it was unbalanced. The decision to embrace this shift requires courage, especially if the established power holder resists the change. Power dynamics are often reinforced by unspoken psychological contracts that define each person's role. These contracts are based on mutual expectations, even if they are never discussed. When one person changes their role, they effectively break the silent agreement. This creates a sense of betrayal in the other, who may have relied on that contract for emotional stability or control. The turning point becomes a confrontation with these hidden agreements, forcing both individuals to either renegotiate their roles or face increasing tension. Another layer of complexity arises from the fact that power is not limited to overt control. Emotional power can be just as influential as material or social power. Someone who plays the role of the emotional anchor in a relationship wields significant influence, even if they are not consciously controlling the other person. If that anchor begins to prioritize their own needs or withdraw some of their emotional labor, the other person may feel destabilized. Similarly, someone who has long provided financial stability may find their sense of importance challenged when the other becomes more financially independent. These subtle shifts can provoke intense emotional reactions because they strike at the foundation of how each person perceives their value within the relationship. The turning point of power dynamics often brings underlying insecurities to the surface. For the person losing power, it may trigger fears of abandonment, irrelevance, or loss of identity. For the person gaining power, it may awaken old fears of conflict, rejection, or being seen as selfish. These emotional undercurrents can complicate communication, making honest dialogue difficult. Instead of addressing the shift directly, both individuals may fall into defensive patterns, one trying to reassert control, the other trying to justify their newfound independence. In many cases, the power shift is not initiated by deliberate rebellion, but by natural personal evolution. People grow, learn, and change. As they do, the roles they once accepted passively may no longer fit. A person who once needed guidance may outgrow that dependency. A partner who once prioritized harmony over self-expression may decide to speak up. These changes are often healthy and necessary for personal development, but they disrupt the relational balance that has been silently maintained for years. Social and cultural factors also play a significant role in power dynamics. Gender roles, cultural traditions, and societal expectations can create predefined power structures that individuals unconsciously adopt. For example, in some cultures, one partner is expected to hold authority over decisions, while the other is expected to comply. When these expectations are challenged, the shift can feel not only personal, but also like a defiance of deeply ingrained norms. This adds additional pressure and resistance as individuals grapple not only with personal change, but also with the weight of collective expectations. The turning point of power dynamics is often accompanied by emotional turbulence because it destabilizes the status quo. What once felt familiar and predictable begins to change shape. The individual who once held power may test the boundaries of this new reality, while the one stepping into power must decide how firmly to assert their newfound agency. It is a psychological crossroads where both individuals must confront their fears, attachments, and perceptions of control. Whether they are prepared for it or not